Cam Brar with Cam's Mortgage Minute on Wednesday, February 20th. Hey, today I'm going to talk to you about disclosure. I was reading an article recently, and it was actually an article about this couple that lives in Bowmanville, and they had purchased a house and they decided to sue their realtor after they discovered that the house they had bought had been the scene of a grisly double murder. They felt that the realtor should have disclosed this because this is something that would have definitely affected their buying decisions. Well, what other kinds of things do folks have to disclose that could potentially affect their buying decisions? So I was reading an article, and in the article they were covering off things as, let's say, murder. Eric and Saidlia Takonomi claimed that the revelation of that double murder was a material defect, and that this whole discovery had traumatized and tainted their property. Now, the realtor who sold the house was, said, hey, look, I didn't have to. It wasn't really anything that relevant. And lawyers that are involved in the case describe it as a gray area about the disclosure. Legally, there's nothing specifically stating that sellers would have to come clean about a homicide on the property, but the Takonomias argue that the neglect is basically, neglects duty of due care, because realtors under common law are supposed to have an active duty to disclose and an active duty to care. So the case is still ongoing. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. I mean, for you yourself out there, if you would that affect your buying decision with a house? I mean, you can only answer that for yourself. Bodies. They recently, I don't know if you heard about it, but I guess Richard III, the exhumation of Richard III under a UK parking lot had made headlines all over the world. Now, what about if you find a body buried in your yard? I know when we've dealt with construction with some situations, sometimes when they're digging, they run into old bones and bodies and stuff. And all of a sudden, when that happens, you've got to get an archaeological assessment. There's additional costs, those sorts of things. So is that something you should also be made aware of, whether this was an old hunting ground, a burial ground, or whatever? And in Ontario, for example, if you do discover a body, it's strictly your responsibility to get rid of it, dispose of it, and I guess that's the law there. Growops. Well, Growops, we all know that you have to disclose Growops. I mean, that's definitely very valuable to the future purchaser, simply because there could be mold issues. There is obviously tampering with electrical. There's lots of other things. And as I mentioned to you before, remediated Growops, only very few lenders actually look at those. So they are a tough property to get remortgaged, refinanced. So if you're buying one of those, you definitely want to know if it was a former Growop. And you know what? It has ramifications. So, I mean, I know if I would want to know. Oil storage tanks. Well, here's another big one. Underground and hidden oil storage tanks are basically a big concern because they can cause a lot of contamination and pollution if they've been leaking, and there's traces of carcinogens and all kinds of things. And I'll tell you, to do a full proper cleanup if one has leaked or leached into the groundwater or whatever else, it is not cheap. I recently ran into a situation, clients had discovered one, didn't know there was one before, and these people were telling me a horror story from when they bought the house. And it turned out by the time they were done, it was almost like a $40,000 bill to clean everything up because the soil around it had been affected and many other factors. And I talked to some environmental folks, and they said that can even be 2-3 times that, depending on the magnitude and the scope. So those are some of the things that sellers would, legally be obligated to disclose. Some maybe they wouldn't feel like they have to, but it's certainly important from a purchaser's point of view. You want to be able to know that the property you're buying is free of issues, problems, and of course there's the typical structural defects. If you know the roof is leaking, there's things that sometimes people say, hey, you know what, I'm going to sell the house in the spring because in the fall when it rains a lot, that's when the basement floods. These are things you're supposed to disclose because, quite honestly, it's certainly not a good way of doing it, and the purchasers have a comeback if they can prove that you knew this and you willingly went out of your way not to tell the truth. Anyways, I thought I'd just share with you some of those. Now, they may seem extreme, or whatever else, especially the murder or the, that sort of a situation. But I know that I had clients who bought a foreclosure that had been the scene of a homicide. And for them, they didn't matter much. They were very happy because they got a great deal on the property, but it definitely did put other people off of it. So, yeah, something interesting. Anyways, I will see you tomorrow for another Mortgage Minute. And again, if you need anything mortgage-wise, don't hesitate. Give us a call. We're always here and happy to help. Take care.